very much for the opportunity to speak to RT. Today has been the first meeting of an expanded BRICS foreign ministers grouping, and I think there have been some important lessons for us. Firstly, we affirm the importance of the BRICS Forum as a global forum that brings together very different ideas, opportunities and objectives, but also I think some pleasant memory of how easy it was to reach consensus when there were only 5 of us. Now that we're larger, the debates are longer, agreement takes a little while, there has to be greater persuasion. And I think it's been a wonderful opportunity to actually reiterate why BRICS exists, that we're a body committed to multilateralism, that we very strongly advocate transparency. We want to modernize the global governance system to be more democratic, more representative. And if you share those ideals, then BRICS is your home, it's where you should be. And we're thrilled that beyond the number we have now, there are many more countries showing an interest in becoming full members of BRICS, and others that would like to be partner members who may participate in some of our activities and not all. So I think, today was really interesting, and I'm sure in the months ahead, we're going to get to understand each other far better than we may do now, and we'll give very careful thought to the level of expansion that we should permit.
Mm-hmm. And I suppose one of the key components of BRICS growing, and a huge portion of the global population looking to BRICS with a sense of hope that we can do things differently in a more fair way. One of the big challenges, of course, is dollar dominance, really. And I suppose one of the big discussion points globally is now, when is BRICS going to emerge as maybe somebody can challenge the dollar, like this challenge to dollar dominance? We've heard Sergei Lavrov today talk about trying to build platforms to trade in each other's currencies. How much of a challenge to that dollar hegemony can BRICS represent, and how important is it that BRICS moves towards some sort of solution to that long-time dominance of the dollar?
See, I think I want to just say that with respect to BRICS, we've always been very careful about behaving like the well-known powers of the world, who tend to be anti-something and who behave as big powers that can clamp down on you. We are more positive in our intention. We wish to establish systems that allow development to proceed smoothly, systems that are inclusive, systems that don't act against weaker economies and seek to destroy them or hold them down. We don't wish to behave like big powers do of the North. So I want to draw that distinction. So having said that, I can confirm that we are concerned at the unilateral imposition of sanctions and its impact on many developing countries, and we would like to develop a system that allows us to exchange financially without having to be afraid that there'll be some punishment which will follow such exchange. So really looking at diversifying international payment systems is an important agenda we've set ourselves, and I think the conclusions are going to be tabled at the Kazakh summit that Russia will host later this year. So we're making progress in the deliberations, and again, our intention is not anti-dollar. It is pro-use of our own currencies and developing their ability to be used in international trade. And if we begin among ourselves as the BRICS countries, this will be an important beginning toward a larger development. But again, for us, it's a positive intention to really ensure that we can trade without threat.
You mentioned the Gazan summit, the upcoming big summit in Tatarstan. How important is this? I mean, given the global situation, there's a lot of challenges at the moment on the global chessboard, if you like. How important is the Gazan summit? As you know, it's a space where some great powers now can talk. China, Russia, South Africa, regionally very important countries. It's also about more than just geopolitics or geostrategic issues or conflict. It's also about things like the BRICS Games and alternatives to long-established Northern Hemisphere organisations which have dominated that space. How important is the Gazan upcoming summit?
Well, it's extremely important. Firstly, the expanded BRICS makes up close to 50% of the world's population and a significant part of the world's GDP. So we're a very, very significant forum just by that set of criteria. Then the activities that we have, I mean, sometimes I can't, conceive of the notion that we have over 230 working group meetings. This just shows you the level of interaction and interface, the people-to-people exchange that we have built as the BRICS countries. So I think increasingly we have established a forum that is taking its place in the global community of nations. And I believe that we will grow from strength to strength. But as I said, the intention is to grow in a progressive manner, to pursue democratic and progressive goals, to ensure a larger voice for the South, and to address equitably the interests of all persons. And so the war, the inhumane attrition against the Palestinian people in Gaza and the occupied Palestinian territories would of course be a great concern to us. And our approach is both support for the just cause of the people of Palestine, but also ensuring that we reform the United Nations so that it is able to play a more impactful role in enhancing peace and security in the world. And so I think the Kazan summit is going to be very important in allowing us to advance these very significant ideas and ensure that as the BRICS body, we really have greater weight in the world, because we emerge from the summit with a set of consensus points that we can then take into the various multilateral fora in which our countries play a role.
You mentioned Palestine, of course, which is a huge issue, particularly among many of the Muslim countries who are now in BRICS. South Africa has taken a real championing role in the ICC and the ICJ. It's been remarkable. As an Irishman in Ireland, we've seen huge support for South Africa's stand. First question in that regard would be, what sort of support among South African people do you see for your stand for what I would consider, and many would consider, justice in Palestine? And second part of the question would be, what is a win? What is a success in the ICC, ICJ for South Africa?
Well, in terms of support, I have not had any negative action toward me with respect to the question of the people of Palestine. It has been Zionist organizations in my country that have expressed opposition to the position that our government has adopted. And we're not surprised, because they support Israel, whatever Israel does. But it's important to stress that this is not a religious matter. So it's not about Muslims and non-Muslims. This is a human rights issue. No one should breach international law in the manner that Israel is doing. No one should breach international humanitarian law in the manner that Israel is doing. You cannot have such large-scale killings, and the world just allows you to get away with it. So I believe this is a test for all of us as humanity to stand up and really fight against such abuse of human beings and ensure that when we as leaders say never again, we really mean it. And this is why establishing institutions that have the capacity to protect the innocent has become such a critical issue, which all of us as part of the world should pay attention to. I'm really welcoming of the ICC prosecutors' decision to approach the judges of the court with respect to issuing of a warrant for war crimes on the Minister of Defense of Israel and the Prime Minister of Israel. For the first time, we now see attention to war crimes being committed by persons in the north, when often we saw the ICC as a body that was established to act against African leaders and no one else. And now we believe there's a much more balanced approach, and we're glad, although we're dismayed at how long it took, but we're glad that that step has now been taken. With respect to the ICJ, we believe the court has clearly indicated on the provisional measures that what should be achieved is an end to hostilities, a permanent ceasefire, and that in the course of the conflict, the people of Palestine should have access to humanitarian aid and their rights should not be abused. The court has also been very clear about the responsibility of an occupier to those that they occupy, because often when we discuss what is happening to the Palestinian people, we don't refer to Israel as an occupying force, which it is, and its responsibilities as an occupier are well set out in the United Nations Charter, and these have been neglected and disrespected as well. So our bottom line is that the court must proceed, the International Court of Justice, to hold full hearings on the merits of the allegations South Africa has brought forward that Israel is intentionally committing genocide against the Palestinian people. We would like this to be heard. We wish to have a full hearing. We believe many nations will come forward with evidence. We're absolutely pleased finally that the ICJ has called for the establishment of an independent UN-created investigative body to both collect and retain evidence on activities that have been underway against the Palestinian people. For me, that was a very, very significant decision, and I hope that the United Nations will act on it.
Well, mentioning earlier, this Western-centric, this Northern-centric infrastructure regarding international bodies, the United Nations, even the ICC, ICJ, we've also heard that Washington would consider, or is considering, sanctioning these international courts. What are your thoughts on that? What are your views on that? Why is Washington happy to be overtly have this a la carte attitude to morality, essentially, when it comes to the global South? What do you think is behind that? What's the engine of that position from Washington?
We have previously expressed our concern that the implementation of international instruments is often done in a manner that exhibits inequity in terms of how we look at countries, but also a double standard in what we regard as human rights and abuse and what is accepted as all right. If it's done to Palestinian people, it's all right, but if it is done to a European, then it's not acceptable. And it is this double standard that drives much of the opinions from powerful communities. So when a warrant is issued for President Putin, everybody says hurrah and celebrates. But when we mention Prime Minister Netanyahu, suddenly there's a victim and not a perpetrator. We have to apply international law equitably for everyone, so that whoever breaches it, we as the world community must agree that they'll be held to account. It can't be that for you it operates in a particular way, but for me, because I'm an African or a woman, it operates in a different way. We are challenging the world, and that's why we approach the ICJ. We want international institutions to work for the good of all and not to treat us as different.
And you mentioned as an African, I mean, in Africa, in South Africa, we've recently had an election. South Africa is looking at a coalition now for the first time in probably 3 decades. So this is also new ground, if you like. What is the potential for positives and negatives there, or maybe instability? I think some people are watching and saying, well, how is this going to be handled on the ground? And also regarding foreign policy, your stands, as we've seen in the ICC, ICJ, what is the potential for South Africa's position, even regarding BRICS, to be impacted by this new coalition, if you like?
Well, I think that the foreign policy positions, I hope, will be guarded very carefully by what is still the largest party, the African National Congress, as it looks at potential partners, and that it will seek, to reach agreement with parties that share its political perspectives, especially on foreign policy, because it would be very, very bad for the African National Congress to be judged as being hypocritical, and that when it comes to assuming power, it then shifts position. I don't believe that will happen. I believe it will remain true to its ideals, because it is President Mandela who said the platform for foreign policy of South Africa will always be human rights and equity. And so I'm, really comfortably convinced that the African National Congress will not desert its foreign policies as practiced thus far, and that human rights and the interests of the most vulnerable and marginalized will always be the driver. But having said that, I don't negate that it's a very complicated set of negotiations, because you have very different parties. ANC achieved 40%. Didn't achieve a majority, unfortunately, but the largest votes. The next in number very clearly is a supporter of Israel, but we are clear that our support for freedom for the Palestinian people will always be part of our foreign policy perspective.
So that leads us to foreign policy, innovations really from an African delegation who visited Ukraine and Russia last year, which was well received in Russia. What are the potentials to expand on that Africa-centric diplomacy, going out to the rest of the world saying, look, let us mediate, let us be the honest brokers here? I think there's an appetite for that in the West, in several countries. What's your viewpoint on that? Is there more to see in that space from South Africa?
I certainly believe so. President Ramaphosa has maintained contact with the two leaders, leader of Ukraine and President Putin of the Russian Federation, and he's always had a very good reception from both. We would like to see the two in a room, and we're increasingly working at persuading that there should be a meeting in which Ukraine and Russia are present. We're concerned that there have been many where it is only Ukraine and other countries that are invited. We believe if we are to have a successful negotiated outcome, the two must be in the room together. So we would like to work toward that. Once we've bedded down all the issues related to the coalition deliberations, it's part of the program agenda list of President Ramaphosa to continue this work, because we recognize that it's very important, not just to the two countries, but to ourselves as Africa as well, because our own continent is impacted both by the sanctions against Russia as well as about the issue of food security. So peace and security are critical for Africa's progress and development, and so we must continue to be a party to these peace efforts.
You mentioned the importance of getting two people in the room, two people around the table. There's an upcoming peace conference to be held in Switzerland. What are your views on that? I mean, asking Ukraine to essentially host a peace conference excluding Russia. What is your view on that from a diplomatic viewpoint? How rational is that? How realistic is that? Is it more theatre than actual peacemaking? What are your views on it?
I'm not quite sure what it hoped would be achieved. Our own advice was that it may be better to have a meeting at the officials level between Russia and Ukraine, and then subsequent to that, move on to a bigger conference. But before deliberations between the two, even if it's at inception stage, we felt this wasn't really a good step to take, because it will be theatre rather than a real focus on achieving a cessation or indeed a proper peace negotiation. So we are concerned, and we will attend at the level of one of our advisors, but our intervention will always be that there has to be the two in a room, and greater effort must be directed at engaging Russia and ensuring that we bring the two into a space where a way forward can be mapped out.
And interestingly, recently, President Putin himself has wrestled with the idea of who to negotiate within Ukraine. And I think the constitutional advisors in Russia suggest that the only valid power now is the Verkhovna Rada, is the parliament. What is your view on the legitimacy now of Vladimir Zelensky in Ukraine, now that his mandate has passed? Essentially, there have been no elections. What's your view on that?
You know, because we wish to play a role, I don't want to appear to comment in a manner that would appear to suggest that one takes a side. Our intention is to persuade toward engagement. And in our view and from our experience, having negotiated our own settlement with respect to apartheid, we know that you can't tell us what the conclusion should be. We are the ones who will determine it. And that is why the two present talking to each other is absolutely imperative. Absent one, you're actually it's an exercise in futility. So I think you have to get real and ensure that you begin a process that leads you out of the conundrum that exists currently.
Mm-hmm. And finally, to finish, our own channel, RT, has been banned in various Western countries. Its output has been oppressed. The messaging, which is basically about balance, about us trying to challenge some narratives in the West and give the Russian side. This oppression of media, it seems to be something that's increasing in the West, in the European Union. We have pre-bunking from Ursula von der Leyen, which suggests that they're going to tell us things are potentially dishonest before we're even told them. What's your view on that? And what should the response be in societies where it's okay to listen to one story, but the other story has to be oppressed by state actors? What's your view on that? Is it healthy?
I'm sure you will know my answer to this. As an African, I've often had to sit in rooms and be lectured on how I should be democratic and how I must respect freedom of expression and particularly freedom of the media. So we have suffered this insult for many, many meetings. And for us as South Africa, where we have freedom of expression, where the media is able to say and do what they wish, within the confines, obviously, of the law, but with a constitutional protection that is very wide, we are intrigued at what we see. And we cannot believe that it is possible that over 140 journalists are murdered in Palestine, and the free press is largely silent and almost complicit in their own colleagues being murdered, banned, imprisoned, treated in the harshest fashion possible. So as Africans, we are watching all of this and wondering what happened to the lessons and the lectures that we had to suffer on so many occasions. Benefiting from those lessons, we now practice freedom of expression, and we're watching with great interest the lack of free expression in established democracies that have had their freedom for so many, many centuries. So it's been a great lesson for us as Africans, and I sincerely hope no African country follows the examples we've seen recently.
Well, Minister, thanks very much for talking. It's been fascinating. We could talk